The vibration of my phone buzzed against the glass desk like a warning shot. I didn't even have to flip it over to know who it was. Area code 440, Nowheresville, Ohio. It was December 23rd. The rest of Chicago was already clocked out, getting wasted on eggnog and pretending to like their in-laws. But I was still here, 40 floors up, burying myself in spreadsheets just to avoid the silence of my own apartment. I stared at the screen. The ID didn't say Dad. It just said Frank. That tells you everything you need to know about us. Let it go to voicemail, Harper, I told myself. He's probably hammered, or he needs bail money. Again. 5 years of radio silence, and he picks tonight to haunt me? No way. I reached out to decline the call, but my thumb hovered. Maybe it was the holiday guilt, or maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment. I slid the bar to answer. Make it quick, Frank. I'm in a meeting. I lied. My voice was cold, sharp, my lawyer voice. But Frank didn't answer. Is this Harper? A woman's voice. Shaky. Old. It sounded like Mrs. Higgins from next door. Speaking. Honey, you need to come home. It's Frank. The police found him. He took a bad fall in the workshop. He's alive, but barely. The heater's been busted for weeks, Harper. He was freezing to death in his own house. My stomach dropped. Not because I was sad, but because I knew my nice, clean, organized life just got hijacked. I said, I'll be there in the morning. My voice was flat. I hung up and looked out at the city lights. I wasn't going back for a family reunion. I was going back to clean up a mess. One last time. The long way back. I packed like I was going to a funeral, not a vacation. Black turtleneck, gray wool coat, leather boots that cost more than my dad's truck. I threw them into my suitcase with precise, angry movements. I wasn't going to Ohio to celebrate. I was going to assess the damage, sign some checks, and get the hell out before the New Year's ball dropped. My assistant, Chloe, texted me, "Do you want me to cancel the Aspen trip?" I stared at the phone. Aspen. Champagne, skiing, and people who didn't know my last name used to be on police reports because of my father. Yes, I typed back. Family emergency. That word tasted like ash in my mouth. Family. The drive from Chicago to Blackwood Creek is 5 hours of flattening landscape. You watch the skyscrapers dissolve into strip malls, then into cornfields buried under dirty gray snow, and finally into the Rust Belt. It was classic Midwest misery. The sky was the color of a bruised knee. By the time I hit the town limits of Blackwood Creek, the snow was falling harder, sticking to the windshield of my Audi. This town was a graveyard of American manufacturing. The steel mill shut down in '08. The main street was half boarded up. A for lease sign hung crookedly in the window of the old diner where Frank used to buy me milkshakes when he was sober enough to drive. Used to. I pulled up to the house, or what was left of it. It looked like a rotten tooth sitting on a hill. The white paint was peeling in long, ugly strips, revealing the gray wood underneath. The porch sagged on the left side. The gutters were hanging loose, choked with dead leaves. It looked exactly like Frank. Broken, neglected. I stepped out of the car, and the wind slapped me in the face. It was silent here. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the dead kind. Mrs. Higgins was waiting on her porch next door, wrapped in a shawl. She waved, looking relieved. I didn't wave back. I just walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on the ice. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Frank never locked anything because he had nothing worth stealing. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of whiskey, which surprised me. It was the smell of old dust, stale coffee, and something metallic. Cold. The house was literally freezing. I could see my breath in the living room. "Frank?" I called out of habit. Silence. I walked through the living room, the same floral couch from the 90s, now threadbare, a stack of unpaid bills on the coffee table. No Christmas tree, no lights, just a cold, empty box of a house. I didn't stay long. I couldn't handle the ghosts in the walls yet. I dropped my bag and headed to the hospital. Mercy General Hospital smelled like bleach and bad cafeteria food. "I'm here for Frank Miller," I told the nurse at the front desk. She was a heavy-set woman with tired eyes. She looked at my coat, then at my face. She knew who I was. In a town this small, everyone knows the drunk's daughter who made it big. She said, "Room 304. Her voice was dry. "He's stable, but he's confused." I asked, "Is he sober?" Blunt. Cold. The nurse paused. "His toxicology report was clean, honey. No alcohol in his system. He just fell. Malnutrition and hypothermia? Clean?" I stopped. That didn't fit the script in my head. Frank fell because he was drunk. That's what Frank did. He didn't just fall. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking loudly on the linoleum floor. Room 304. I pushed the door open, and there he was. He looked small. That was the first thing that terrified me. Frank Miller was a bear of a man. Broad shoulders, hands like catcher's mitts, but the man in the bed was a skeleton wrapped in paper-thin skin. His hair was completely white. He was asleep, a plastic oxygen tube under his nose. I stood at the foot of the bed, gripping my expensive leather purse like a shield. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell at him for ruining my holiday, for dragging me back to this hellhole. But looking at him, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity, and I hated it. "You look like hell, old man," I whispered. His eyes fluttered open. It took a moment for him to focus. He blinked, looking at the ceiling, then slowly lowered his gaze to me. He didn't smile. He didn't look surprised. He just looked tired. "Harper," he croaked. His voice was like gravel rubbing together. I said, "Mrs. Higgins called. Said you tried to freeze yourself to death." He tried to shift in the bed, but winced. "Heater broke. Last Tuesday. And you didn't call someone to fix it?" "Cost money," he mumbled, looking away. "Money I don't got." "So you just sat there?" He looked at me then, and for a second, I saw the old Frank, the stubborn one. I was handling it. "Yeah, you handled it great, Frank. You're in a hospital bed." He sighed, closing his eyes again. "Go back to Chicago, Harper. I don't need you watching me die." "Trust me, I don't want to be here," I snapped. "But someone has to make sure the house doesn't collapse while you're in here." "The house is fine," he grunted. "Don't touch nothing, especially in the garage." My ears perked up. The garage. Frank was protective of his tools, sure, but the way he said it, there was panic in his voice. "Why?" I narrowed my eyes. "What's in the garage, Frank? You running a meth lab now?" "Just leave it," he coughed, a harsh, rattling sound. "Just let me be." The nurse walked in then to check his vitals, cutting our warm reunion short. I stepped back. "I'm going to the house. I'll get the heater fixed tomorrow. Don't die on me tonight, Frank. The paperwork would be a nightmare." I walked out before I could see my face crack. I stormed back to the car, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was sober. He was broke, and he was hiding something in the garage. I drove back to the cold, dark house, dread settling in my stomach like a stone. I didn't know it yet, but the silence in that house was louder than any screaming match we'd ever had.
The house wasn't just cold. It was hostile. I didn't bother taking off my coat. I could see my breath puffing out in little white clouds in the kitchen. I turned on the tap, hoping for hot water, but the pipes just groaned and spat out a stream of brown sludge before running clear and icy. Great, I muttered. Just great. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since a stale bagel at O'Hare Airport. I walked over to the fridge, a prehistoric GE model that hummed like a dying lawnmower, and yanked it open. I expected to find the usual Frank Miller diet, a six-pack of cheap beer, maybe some moldy takeout. But the light inside flickered over nothing. A jar of pickles, a half-empty carton of milk that expired 3 weeks ago, and a stack of ketchup packets from McDonald's. That was it. No beer. No food. I slammed the door shut. The magnets on the fridge rattled. One of them was a picture of me from 3rd grade, missing 2 front teeth, holding a soccer trophy. The corners were curled and yellowed. He still had it up. I turned away, feeling a weird tightness in my chest. He wasn't drinking. He was starving. I needed to find the thermostat, even though he said it was broken. Maybe I could rig it. I walked down the hallway, my boots thudding heavy on the warped floorboards. I passed the bathroom and stopped. Frank's warning echoed in my head. Don't touch nothing. Naturally, that meant I was going to touch everything. I pushed the bathroom door open. It was clean. Surprisingly clean. No grime in the sink. I opened the medicine cabinet behind the mirror. This is where Frank used to hide his stash. Painkillers, whiskey flasks, whatever took the edge off. I braced myself to find a bottle. Instead, I saw a row of small, round coins lined up on the shelf. I reached out and picked one up. It was heavy, cool to the touch. A bronze medallion. On the front it said, "To thine own self be true." On the back, V, Roman numeral for 5. 5 years. I picked up the next one. 4 years. 3 years. 2. 1. My hands started to shake. I gripped the countertop. Frank had been sober for 5 years. 5 whole years. And in all that time, every time I ignored his calls, every time I told my friends my dad was a hopeless drunk, he was here, collecting these chips. Alone. I felt sick. Not the angry kind of sick, the guilty kind. I shoved the chip back onto the shelf and backed out of the bathroom. I needed air. The house felt like it was shrinking, suffocating me with truths I wasn't ready to accept. I wandered into the kitchen again, restless. It was 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep in that freezing bedroom. My eyes drifted to the back door, the one that led to the backyard, to the garage. Don't touch nothing, especially in the garage. Why? Was he hiding money? Stolen goods? Or maybe he had relapsed and hid the bottles out there. The thought gave me an excuse. If he's hiding booze, I told myself, I need to know. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the junk drawer and unlocked the back door. The wind outside was brutal. It cut right through my wool coat. The garage door didn't have a lock, just a rusty latch. I hesitated. His voice was so desperate in the hospital. Screw it. I lifted the latch and heaved the door open. It screamed on its hinges, metal grinding on metal. I stepped inside and clicked the flashlight on. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't musty or damp like the house. It smelled rich,
earthy. Cedar, pine, varnish, sawdust. It smelled like Christmas. I swept the light across the room. I expected a mess. I expected piles of junk. What I saw stopped me cold. The garage was immaculate. Tools were hung on the pegboard in perfect order. Hammers, chisels, saws. The floor was swept clean. And in the center of the room, on the main workbench, sat a half-finished rocking horse. The wood was smooth, sanded to perfection. But that wasn't what Frank was hiding. My light caught something in the corner, stacked against the far wall. Wooden crates. Old, sturdy packing crates. There were 10 of them, maybe. 12. Stacked high, covered in a thin layer of dust. I walked over slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. Each crate had a label stapled to the wood. Frank's messy block handwriting in black marker. I shined the light on the bottom crate. Harper, 2018. I moved the light up. Harper, 2019. Harper, 30th birthday. Harper, promotion gift. My breath hitched. The light beam wavered. He hadn't forgotten. Not a single one. I reached out, my gloved hand trembling, and touched the lid of the crate marked 2018. The year I stopped coming home. The lid wasn't nailed down. It was just resting there, waiting. I hooked my fingers under the wood and lifted. The lid came off with a soft groan of wood against wood. I propped the flashlight on a shelf so the beam cut through the darkness, landing directly inside the crate. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny, suspended ghosts. Inside, there was no wrapping paper, no store-bought bows, just layers of old newspaper and wood shavings packed tight for protection. My hands were numb from the cold, but I didn't feel it. I reached in and pulled back the packing material. The smell of fresh cedar wafted up, preserving the moment like a time capsule. I gasped. Sitting in the bottom of the crate was a dollhouse. But not just any dollhouse. It was a perfect miniature replica of the brownstone apartment I lived in back in Chicago during law school. The one I had only mentioned to him once, in passing, during a 2-minute phone call 5 years ago. It's got these arched windows, Dad, and a red door. It's small, but it's mine. He had remembered, and he had built it. I pulled it out carefully. It was heavy, solid oak. The detail was agonizing. He had carved the tiny brickwork on the facade. The little red door actually opened on tiny, handmade brass hinges. Inside, he had carved a little desk with stacks of tiny wooden books. A tag was tied to the chimney with twine. So you always have a home. Love, Dad. I felt a crack form in the center of my chest, a literal physical pain. I set the house down on the workbench and turned to the next crate. Harper, Christmas 2019. I ripped the lid off this one. Inside lay a set of scales of justice. But unlike the cheap metal ones you see in tacky law offices, these were carved from dark walnut and light maple, balanced perfectly. The pans were suspended by delicate silver chains. The base was engraved, "For the one who fights for the truth." The truth. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. I hadn't been fighting for the truth. I'd been fighting to forget him. I'd been telling everyone he was a monster, a deadbeat, while he was out here in the freezing cold, carving masterpieces for a daughter who wouldn't even pick up the phone. I moved faster now, frantic. I was an archaeologist digging up my own guilt. Harper, 30th birthday. This one was the biggest. I pulled out a rocking chair, not full size, but a model. And sitting in the chair was a carving of a girl reading a book. It was me.
It was me at 10 years old, back before the vodka took him away, back when I used to read on the porch while he sanded cabinets. The detail on the girl's face, he had captured the way I used to chew my lip when I concentrated. He hadn't seen my face in 5 years, but he remembered every line. My knees gave out. I sank to the concrete floor, surrounded by the sawdust and the silence. The flashlight beam cast long, jagged shadows against the wall of crates. He kept them all. He didn't sell them for booze money. He didn't burn them for heat when the furnace died. He froze in his own house rather than burn the gifts he made for me. "You idiot," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You stubborn, stupid old man." Tears, hot and angry, spilled over my cheeks. I wiped them away furiously with the back of my glove, but they kept coming. I looked at the stack. There were more. Graduation. First big case. He had been tracking me. Maybe he Googled me. Maybe he asked Mrs. Higgins. He knew about the promotion. He knew about the big case. He had been celebrating my life from the shadows, building trophies for victories he wasn't invited to witness. I reached for the crate marked Christmas 2023, this year's, the one he never got to finish. The lid was loose. Inside, the object was only half done. It looked like a carousel. The horses were rough, blocked out but not detailed yet. The sandpaper was still sitting next to it. He must have been working on this when he fell. He was down here in the freezing cold, trying to finish a horse for a daughter who was currently planning a ski trip to Aspen. I grabbed the unfinished horse and squeezed it until the rough wood dug into my palm. The narrative in my head, the one where I was the victim and he was the villain, shattered. It didn't just break, it evaporated. He wasn't perfect. God knows he wasn't. But he had tried, in the only way he knew how, with his hands, with wood and silence. And I was the one who had given up. I sat there on the garage floor for a long time, shivering, holding the unfinished carousel horse against my chest like a lifeline. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose door, but I didn't leave. I couldn't leave, because for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't just Harper, the lawyer. I was Frank Miller's daughter, and I had a lot of work to do. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, wrapped in 3 blankets, staring at the peeling wallpaper. My brain, usually occupied with merger clauses and court dates, was now running a different kind of inventory. Roof repairs, plumbing check, HVAC replacement, grocery run. At 6 a.m. sharp, I was on the phone. "I don't care that it's Christmas Eve," I barked into my iPhone, pacing the freezing kitchen. "I'll pay double the holiday rate, triple if you get here in an hour. Just get the heat on." By 8 a.m., a van marked Miller and Sons HVAC pulled into the driveway. The guy who hopped out looked about my age. Flannel shirt, beard, eyes that looked too kind for this town. "Harper?" he asked, squinting at me as I stood on the porch. "Harper Miller?" I blinked. "Do I know you?" He laughed, grabbing a toolbox. "It's Caleb. We sat next to each other in Mrs. Gable's biology class. I let you copy my frog dissection notes." Caleb, the scrawny kid with braces. He wasn't scrawny anymore. "Right," I said, dropping the corporate mask for a second. "Caleb, look, the furnace is dead. Can you resurrect it?" "For Frank, I'd do it for free," he said, walking past me. "He fixed my mom's porch railing last summer. Didn't charge her a dime." Another punch to the gut. Everyone in this town knew a version of Frank I had refused to see. While Caleb worked on the furnace, I drove to the grocery store. I filled the cart like a doomsday prepper. Eggs, bacon, fresh vegetables, actual coffee, and the specific brand of oatmeal Frankie's to like. I wasn't just buying food, I was trying to buy back lost time. When I got back, the house was humming. A low, beautiful rumble coming from the vents. Warmth, real, actual heat began to fill the stale air. I paid Caleb, who tried to refuse the money, but I shoved $300 into his pocket and took a shower. I washed off the city, the travel, and the dust from the garage. Then I grabbed something from my purse. I put it in my coat pocket, and I drove back to the hospital. Frank was sitting up this time. He was eating green Jell-O with a plastic spoon, looking miserable. When I walked in, he stiffened. He was expecting the angry daughter again, the one who checked her watch every 5 minutes. I pulled up a chair and sat down. Close. The heat is on, and the fridge is full. Frank stopped chewing. He looked at me suspiciously. "You hire someone?" "Caleb, from high school." "Good kid," he grunted. "Did he overcharge you?" "I overpaid him." "There's a difference." Silence stretched between us. But it wasn't the cold silence of yesterday. It was heavy, charged with the secret I was carrying in my pocket. "So," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "I went into the garage." Frank's spoon clattered onto the plastic tray. His face went pale. The panic in his eyes was heartbreaking. He looked like a kid caught stealing candy. "Harper," he stammered, his hands shaking. "I was going to clean it out. I didn't know what to do with them." "You didn't know what to do with them?" I repeated softly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the bronze medallion, the 5-year sobriety chip. I set it gently on the trade table, right next to the Jell-O. The metal clinked against the plastic. He stared at it. He didn't look up. His jaw worked, trying to hold back emotion. "Why didn't you tell me, Dad?" I asked. My voice cracked on the word Dad. I hadn't used it in years. "I tried," he whispered. "First year, I picked up the phone a dozen times. But what was I going to say? Sorry? Sorry don't fix 10 years of drinking, Harper. Sorry don't bring back your graduation I missed." He took a shaky breath. I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I just built the things you needed, maybe that was enough. I figured you were better off without me messing up your fancy Chicago life." "You built a scale of justice," I said, tears stinging my eyes again. "You tracked my cases." He offered a weak, crooked smile. "Mrs. Higgins has an iPad. She showed me your picture in the legal journal. You looked fierce, like your mother." I reached out and covered his hand with mine. His skin was paper dry and cold. "I'm not better off without you, Frank. I'm just lonely and tired." He looked at me then, really looked at me. He saw past the expensive coat and the lawyer haircut. He saw the tired girl underneath. "I didn't send the boxes because I was scared you'd send them back." I would have. The truth hurt, but it was necessary. 5 years ago, I would have burned them. I squeezed his hand, but not today. Frank turned his hand over and gripped mine back. His grip was weak, but it was there. "When can I get out of here?" he grumbled, wiping his eyes with the other hand. "The food here tastes like wet cardboard." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "Doctor says tomorrow morning. Christmas Day." "Great," he muttered. "Christmas in that freezing house." "House is warm, Dad," I reminded him, "and I bought a tree." He looked at me, surprised. "A tree?" "Yeah, a big one. It's naked right now." I paused, looking him right in the eye. "I figured we have a lot of ornaments to hang up. About 10 years worth." Frank Miller didn't cry. He wasn't that kind of man. But he nodded, looked out the window, and cleared his throat loudly.
Christmas morning in Blackwood Creek broke with a sky so blue it looked painted on. The snow had stopped, leaving the world covered in a thick, white blanket that hid the rust and the potholes. I drove Frank home in silence. Not the awkward silence of 3 days ago, but a comfortable one. The kind that didn't need to be filled with noise. When I helped him out of the car, he leaned heavy on me. He was weaker than he wanted to admit. I walked him up the steps, his grip tight on my arm. "Door's unlocked," he muttered, out of habit. "I know, Dad, I know." We stepped inside. The heat hit us first, a solid wall of warmth. The house smelled different today. I had brewed a pot of strong coffee, and the scent mixed with the pine of the 7-foot Douglas fir standing in the corner of the living room. Frank stopped. He stared at the tree. It was naked, just green branches reaching out, waiting. Next to it, on the floor, sat the stack of wooden crates I had hauled in from the garage. Frank looked at the crates, then at me. His eyes were shiny. "You brought him in," he said softly. "We can't have a naked tree, Frank. It's un-American." I tried to joke, but my voice was thick. I helped him settle into his armchair, the one with the cigarette burns on the armrests, and draped a quilt over his legs. Then I sat on the floor and opened the first crate. 2014, the year I left for law school. I pulled out a wooden ornament carved like a gavel. I handed it to him. He rubbed his thumb over the smooth wood. "I made this the day you got your acceptance letter. I was going to mail it, but I was 3 days sober. My hands were shaken so bad I dropped it twice." "It's perfect," I said. He handed it back to me. "You hang it, high up." For the next 2 hours, that's all we did. We unpacked a decade of missing time. The tiny rocking chair went on a sturdy lower branch. The scales of justice swayed gently near the top. The miniature books were tucked into the gaps. Each ornament was a conversation we never had. "This was when you got the corner office," he'd say, handing me a carved skyscraper. "This was the year I broke my hip," he murmured, handing me a carved walking cane. Finally, we got to the last box. 2023. I pulled out the unfinished carousel horse. It was rough, splintery, and half-sanded. Frank sighed. "It ain't done. It's ugly." "It's not ugly," I said firmly. "It's a work in progress." I found a piece of red ribbon, tied it around the horse's neck, and hung it right in the center of the tree. It stood out among the polished ones, raw and real, just like us. We sat back. The tree was full. It didn't look like a store-bought display. It looked like a history museum of a broken family trying to glue itself back together. Frank took a sip of his coffee. His hand was steady today. "So," he said, looking at the tree, not at me. "When's your flight?" He didn't ask me to stay. He knew I wouldn't. He knew I had a life, a career, and a rent that cost more than this house. That was the reality. "I'm tonight at 10. He nodded. He expected that. A shadow crossed his face. The fear of being alone again. "But," I added, picking up my mug. I'm coming back for Easter. Frank's head snapped up. Easter? Yeah, and I'm hiring Caleb to fix the porch next week, so you don't dare touch a hammer, Frank Miller. If I find out you climbed a ladder, I will sue you, and I'm a very expensive lawyer. A slow grin spread across his face. It was the first time I'd seen him genuinely smile in years. It changed his whole face, erasing the wrinkles of worry. You're bossy, he chuckled, just like your mother. I learned from the best. I stood up and grabbed my coat. It was time to pack. The visit was over, but the connection wasn't. As I walked to the door, I turned back one last time. The room was warm. The tree was glowing in the afternoon sun, heavy with 10 years of love. And Frank was sitting there, watching the dust motes dance in the light, holding the 5-year sobriety chip in his hand. He wasn't the monster I ran from. He was just a man who had lost his way and had carved a path back, one piece of wood at a time. Dad? I called out. Yeah, Harper. Merry Christmas. He raised his coffee mug in a toast. Merry Christmas, kid. Drive safe. I walked out into the cold air, but I didn't feel the chill anymore. I got into my car and looked in the rearview mirror as I drove away. The house was small and old in the distance, but for the first time in a long time, the light in the window was on.
We often wait a lifetime to say the things that matter the most. Don't be like Harper. Don't wait for a box of memories to bridge the gap. Make that call today. If this story touched your heart, please drop a like. It really helps the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And for more stories that hit home, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. I'll see you in the next chapter.